everybody, and welcome on in. It's very nice to see you all here. Give everybody a second or two to make their way over to the thing, just allowing as many people in as possible so they can get here on time. Very, very nice. Okay, for everybody that is here now, welcome to this week's episode, or today's episode of Conversations with Authors. We're very, very lucky to have you all here with us today for such an excellent and special event. My name is Nick Mitchell, and I'm very glad to have you back. We here at the bookstore are very excited to bring to you some of the best authors and conversations that you can find out there on the internet. If you've seen our events before, well then, welcome back. If you're new here, then Book Passage is an independently run bookstore out of the San Francisco Bay Area. And back before the shutdown, we hosted book talks just like these and book panels just like these at our stores quite often. As we're now doing them on YouTube, we'll continue to do so in the future. Please consider following us so that you can be alerted every time things like these go live or every time we post pre-recorded author interviews, as we do from time to time. If you'd like to check out our upcoming events so you can look at them on your own, you can find them all at bookpassage.com/event. And if you'd like to check out tonight's book, which is Afterparties, or anything else that's mentioned here tonight, you can find it all in the description below or from me spamming it periodically in the YouTube chat. Finally, if you have questions for tonight's speakers, any of them, please take the time to write them in the YouTube chat, and I will see them and copy them over so that everybody can answer them, or so we can look through them. We don't always get through to every question, but all of your comments, questions, and everything else is always appreciated. Now allow me to actually introduce our event. Tonight, or this afternoon I should say, we are here to honor the life and writings of Anthony So, who tragically passed away in 2020. Although everyone here will certainly share more about him later, I will say that he is a graduate of Stanford University who earned his MFA in fiction at Syracuse. He was writing, or his writings appeared in The New Yorker, The Paris Review, N+1, Granta, as a native of Stockton, California, as well as a resident of San Francisco, California. He taught at Syracuse and, most importantly for this event, the Center for Empowering Refugees and Immigrants in Oakland, California. The last of which, as I said, is reflected deeply in Afterparties, as well as just elements from his life and family and friends. Deeply reflected in Afterparties, which is his short story collection, which shows the heart and vitality of his life, as well as the Cambodian community. I'm very excited to be able to share it with you today, and to share these wonderful speakers with you all today. Samantha So Lam, who is first up, was born and raised in Stockton, California. Her parents are Cambodian refugees. First in her family to graduate from college, Samantha decided to become a teacher. She dedicates her career to teaching elementary grades in urban neighborhoods and believes deeply in equitable access to rigorous education for all students, especially Black and brown children. She currently lives and teaches in Richmond, California, with her husband, her son, and her dog. And additionally, I will introduce Alex Torres, who studied English and Spanish literature at Stanford and UC Berkeley. At Stanford and UC Berkeley. He was a Fulbright scholar in Bogota, Colombia. His writing has appeared or is forthcoming in BuzzFeed, The Millions, Poets and Writers Magazine, ESQ, a journal of the American Renaissance, Hobart, and elsewhere. Also based in San Francisco, he is currently working on a novel set in Bogota and a collection of short stories set in San Francisco. Again, I am elated to be able to share all of this with you today, and I'm more than happy to pass it off to Samantha. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I am sorry if you hear my son crying in the background. He just woke up, but my name is Samantha So Lam, and I'm so excited to read to you on behalf of my brother, Anthony Veasna So. This has been a long time coming for Anthony. He dedicated long nights of writing and editing to get Afterparties published. When he passed, I made a promise to myself and to him to see it through. Many people have told me how much they love Anthony, how much they loved his work, how much they relate to it, make connections to it. But what I think is special about his writing is that when I read it, I feel like one of his characters. I feel like I live in his stories. Two of the short stories has the theme of reincarnation, which is a very common topic for us. My mom explained that reincarnation is a way for the soul to grieve, understand, and let go of the previous life through another life. Over time, the soul eventually leaves that person's body. I think Anthony was really fascinated with this idea and really captures the complexity through the story Somali Saray, Saray Somali. So, to set the scene, Saray has lived her life as Somali's reincarnation. Saray is a caretaker and is taking care of Ma Ang, her grandmother's second cousin, as she's dying. Ma Ang believes Saray is her niece, Somali, and calls Saray Somali, thus Somali Saray, Saray Somali. This section shares how Saray feels about Somali inhabiting her body and soul. Sitting at the kitchen table, I stare at my plate of plain rice. Since becoming Ma Ang's full-time nurse, I've had nightmares of Somali, nightmares I haven't experienced since I was a kid. Most mornings, I now wake up gasping for air. I know these nightmares aren't real, that they're only dreams, that they aren't based on fact or anyone's actual life. Still, I feel as though I'm being drowned by the past, by Somali's memories, her torrent of unresolved emotion, which burrow deeper inside my body with every restless night. The dreams are horrible. Somali working in the rice fields, pregnant and starving, her unborn child already lacking the nourishment it'll need. Somali's water breaking in the darkest hour of the night and Ma Ang covering her mouth so the screams of labor won't carry over to the ears of the Khmer Rouge soldiers. Then Somali muffling her newborn's mouth so that no one will catch the crying, cooing into its ear. Sorry, sorry, sorry. Some dreams I'm Somali and pregnant with her daughter Molly, my cousin and Ma Ang's other grandniece. It never makes sense as Molly wasn't born until the late 80s, but the dreams strike me like real life. As I desperately try to protect the hungry fetus kicking the walls of my womb, this baby abandoned with me, this doomed daughter whose weight feels both too heavy to easily bear and too light to be any kind of healthy or secure or whole. I suffer the consequences of this indispensable rage that Somali harbored toward her then husband, who actually did flee the country without his wife, even as she was pregnant with what would have been Molly's older sibling, had Somali not miscarried. This rage surges through my veins, fueling my will to survive my hellish and haunted subconscious. And then, when I'm awake and working, it continues to flare up in me, inducing migraines that color my sight with resentment. I don't blame Ma Ang for the return of these dreams, but I can't possibly endure them for much longer. In other dreams, I'm watching Somali as if I'm her reflection. On rare occasions, when I eat too much rice, maybe Somali and I will have a conversation at her old apartment on Greensboro Way, over a dinner of, yes, heaps of white rice. Usually these occasions involve Somali telling my future, as if reading from a fortune cookie. But one dream in particular stays with me. The dream unfolds. Somali and I are sitting at a dinner table. She wears a white samput covered in jewels, perfectly matching her necklace. She's almost akin to an apsara in a painting, aggressively elegant. Like at any second, she'll bend her hands backwards to her wrists and sway. I watch her raise the rice to her mouth, grain by grain, pinching each speck between her index finger and thumb. After a while, she stops and studies me without focusing her eyes, as though I were a large expanse of nothing. My daughter, she finally says, will inherit the golden chain hugging my neck. I don't say it's the same necklace I wore as a kid, the one I was given to celebrate our connection. It's been in my family for generations, she explains. Molly's grandfather refused to let the communists take his wealth, and that's why he died. Because everyone knew the rice factory king buried things. My father wanted too much. He wanted his wife, and his mistress, his wealth. He died because he wanted, wanted, wanted. Let this chain remind Molly of that. So thank you. That section was from Somali Saray, Saray Somali. The stories were named after my two younger aunts on my father's side. So now I'm going to hand it over to my brother's partner, Alex Torres.
Thanks, Sam. That reading was really beautiful. I love that story so much. So I am going to introduce our wonderful panelist. And, it's funny, it's hard, I go back and forth between wanting to cry and laugh. But I will say that the first one I'll introduce, Mira Jacob. Anthony was such a huge fan of her. He talked about her nonstop. So I'm so glad we got her on the stage tonight. Mira Jacob is a novelist, memoirist, illustrator, and cultural critic. Her graphic memoir, Good Talk, a memoir on conversations, was shortlisted for the National Book Critics Circle Award and longlisted for the PEN Open Book Award. And her novel, The Sleepwalker's Guide to Dancing, was named one of the best books of the year by Kirkus Review, the Boston Globe, Goodreads, Bustle, and The Millions. She lives in Brooklyn. And just shameless plug, these are Mira's books. They're amazing. You should read them. These are Anthony's copies. He actually didn't annotate them, but read Mira's books. They're great. They're really funny. Monica Suk is another panelist who I've gotten to know really well over the course of this past year. And she was a student of my undergraduate advisor, Evan Boland. So I feel like we have this weird kinship by being bullied by this, older Irish poet. Maybe we don't, I don't know. And Evan also really loved Anthony. So there's this really special connection from Stanford there with us. Monica Suk is the author of A Nail the Evening Hangs On. She has received fellowships from Hedgebrook, Kudamon, MacDowell, National Endowment for the Arts, Poetry Society of America, and others. Suk is currently a Jones Lecturer at Stanford University. Alongside Anthony Veasna So and Danny Tan Nguyen, she taught poetry to Southeast Asian youths at the Center for Empowering Refugees and Immigrants in Oakland, California. And again, another shameless plug, please read Monica's book. It's so good. I just read it the other day. Anthony loved it. And then last but definitely not least, Brian Washington. Brian Washington is a National Book Award 535 honoree, NBCC Award finalist, and winner of the Dylan Thomas Prize and the Ernest J. Gaines Award for Literary Excellence. He received the New York Public Library Young Lions Fiction Award for his first book, Lot, which was also a finalist for the NBCC's John Leonard Prize, the Penn Robert W. Bingham Prize, and the Aspen Words Literary Prize. He has written for The New Yorker, The New York Times Magazine, BuzzFeed, among other publications. His best-selling debut novel, Memorial, was a GMA Book Club pick, a New York Times notable pick, one of Entertainment Weekly's 10 best books of the year, and a finalist for the NBCC Fiction Prize. And I don't have Lot, unfortunately, but I do have Memorial. It's an amazing book, and you should also read this one. So you've got 5 books to read. But I did want to introduce their writings. Anthony was really moved by all 3 of these authors, by their personhood. They all did a lot of amazing things for Anthony. And I expect that this conversation will be more free-flowing, and I really want to encourage everyone to jump in, Monica, Mira, Brian. But I kind of wanted to start with Mira, because I think one thing that really stands out to me about Anthony's work, and everyone always says, Anthony was so funny. He was a stand-up comedian. He was all about the jokes. And Mira's book is also hilarious. I've only got to know Mira a little bit, but I assume she's really funny. And I would also love to have Monica and Brian jump in, but I would love just to hear what you think about Anthony's sense of humor, what strikes you as special or unusual, and how it really works well with his writing.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a good question. Also, it's so funny because the minute someone says you're funny, you're like, no, really. I don't think you understand the darkness of my soul. But I will say that I do think that Anthony, one of the things I most loved about having him in class and also talking to me for hours after class is that I think we both have the place where when like the sadness compounds with anger, we get to the funniest place that we can go. Like somehow those 2 things are the magic train to as funny as we can get. And there was just a lot of his energy in class and his sort of relentlessness and the kind of the way he would pull things apart, the way he would sort of work around the subject, which I loved because it's that sort of frenetic energy that's never satisfied, right? So it pulls everything apart in this way that is both kind of calculating and also deeply human. And I love that he never lost either of those things, right? Like that, I feel like I have the book here too. I feel like that's one of the most amazing things about reading his work and also just thinking of who he was, is that it was both of those things. It was this real tenacity to kind of pull apart something and really need to understand it from the inside out. And then this kind of weird, funny, quirky love that sort of shined through a lot as well. So that was my experience of having him in class, and also talking my ear off after.
I'm just curious, was there any sort of moment in class, any anecdote? Did he ever say anything? And he's been known to say things that were really outrageous. I'm just kind of.
He definitely did say outrageous things. You're gonna have to come back to me on that, because I'm gonna have to think of which ones are safe for this audience. I will say also that his classmates, it was funny, one of them wrote me the other day and said that she told him at graduation, basically, that she had always thought that he was scary, and he was like, thank you for that. And I was like, yes, that totally makes sense. That's so in line with the person that I know. So that's what I got for you.
That's great. Well, Monica, I kind of wanted to, Mira was his teacher. You taught with Anthony. And also I just wanted to put out a plug for human development. That sort of is like Anthony's grandiose statement on teaching private school, which is, private school in San Francisco full of a bunch of rich kids is very different than the Center for Empowering, Refugees. I was wondering, Monica, if you might speak about what it was like to teach with Anthony. What was his presence in the classroom like? What was magnetic about it? What was special about it? What was magical about it?
Yeah, thank you for that question. What was it like to teach with Anthony at CERI? Well, so to give the audience some context, in the fall of 2019, I had actually reached out to Anthony along with our friend Danny Ten Nguyen to teach a poetry writing retreat for Southeast Asian youth in Oakland, California. And he was down immediately. It was like, yes, absolutely, let's do this, So we had all of these lesson planning sessions in San Francisco. He was probably going back and forth between Syracuse and San Francisco, but we would just like sit down and brainstorm what we wanted to do. Like, could we do it for a whole week? Could we do it for like a whole summer? Like, what was going to happen? So we actually ended up landing on a weekend poetry retreat because he was traveling quite a bit, and so was Danny. And anyways, I just vividly remember like a whole bunch of colorful Post-it notes, like just thinking about like what we're going to do with these kids. And this was like at Mauer Park, where he, like right by his apartment in the city. So we were, I just vividly remember like Anthony suggesting that we build like a kind of timeline for our students so that they could locate their own personal histories within like this larger collective history that we shared as Southeast Asians. And so when we finally got to November of 2019, to that weekend with all of our youths, I just remember just, sitting on the floor in a circle with Anthony, kind of like in the middle, and all of us just kind of like listening to him talk and just enjoying, his generosity. And I just remember like we had to share, there was like a space where there were like different rooms where we could teach. And Anthony was like in the waiting room area where there were couches and like a coffee table. So his students and him were in that space. And I kind of shared the room that was connected to it. So there were like these double doors that closed off our separate rooms. I was in the larger room where our elders, where they do like group therapy and stuff like that. So I just remember like trying to talk to my students, but then like hearing Anthony's voice like booming in the next room, just like he was just like talking about like, how the students shouldn't be intimidated by poetry. And he really got to share with them a kind of language that they could also access their own stories. And so I wanted to briefly share one of our students' words about Anthony. This is from our student, Anna. I'll just paraphrase it a little bit. She just said that, she said, I could tell that Anthony was doing things and that he was part of something big. He also had many stories to share and was also very down to earth. He had self-deprecating humor where like he would be modest and critical about himself, but in reality, I think he was very relatable and held a space of vulnerability for us, as in the youth at CIRI. So when I think about Anna's words about Anthony, having him as a teacher, just the way that he held space for these youths to be vulnerable, to be able to, just for them to feel seen and cared for, I think that speaks a lot to like just my own experience too of having him as a co-teacher in our community. And so this was something that we were hoping to do more of in the future. So that was the very beginning of our time together teaching at CIRI. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for that answer, Monica. And I know anybody that saw Anthony teach, he was just such a, I saw him teach a couple of times. He also taught at a nonprofit in Marin County called Next Generation Scholars. I'm sure somebody from NGS is here right now. And I mean, he would just, I mean, they would like be playing like Hotline Bling by Drake and he'd be like jamming out with them. And then he'd be going off some crazy tangent about feminist art. I mean, he was just, I don't know. I love the way that he could move with the students. He could get on their level in the way that I always thought was so impressive. He was an incredible teacher.
You're actually, you know what's so funny is you're bringing up something that made me think of what one of the students that were in our class wrote, which I love that she says it. She says, Anthony talked big sometime in a way that could make people uncomfortable, but he genuinely put in the work. And she's talking about how she was in the program. When I shared a house with him, Zainab, and two other MFAers in our first and second year, he would send us all questions, synonyms for ejaculate, and text me questions about how to order his story collection in the middle of the night. He had this relationship with a lot of people in the MFA, not just me, texting them observations about their work, snippets of things that he'd read that reminded him of our writing, and so forth. And that I feel like that's, Monica, that's kind of what you're talking about too on the student level, but it's on the peer level too, which I feel like it seemed like a really, seemed just like something that was very intrinsic to him.
He was, you know, it's funny, we took classes together in college and he would give me great feedback on my papers. And he was just like that. He loved to read people's work and he was always thinking about them. He'll read your book and I think he'd be like, for your next book, you got to do this, this, this. He would want to plot out somebody's career for them. He was just so giving and thoughtful in that way. So thanks for that, Mira. So Brian, I wanted to, you know, Anthony really loved your writing, just to say it. I know you two never got to meet in person. And I think you're like an amazing short story writer. And I feel like a lot of your short stories really touch on some of the themes that, you know, Anthony explored. One thing that really one of my friends, when they read Afterparties, they point out, how did Anthony write about a nurse? I don't understand how Anthony wrote about a nurse. Like, how did he imagine the life of a nurse? But then there's these other characters where, you know, we've got the queer teacher in human development. We've got the three women of Chuck's Donuts. I kind of was just curious, maybe Brian, maybe as like a craftsman of the short story, if you could maybe just talk about, you know, the range of Anthony's stories, the worlds they inhabit, how they go together, or the challenges of putting together a collection. I know it's a really broad answer, but I'm hoping something sticks with you there. Or a broad question.
Yeah. No, of course. I mean, I'm still trying to figure out how he accomplished all the things that he accomplished in the collection, right? I think, you know, I was first introduced to his work by in the New Yorker story, and I was kind of like just parsing through, and I was like, okay, like this guy is like really extraordinary, like this is really good. And we made each other's acquaintance like over email not too long afterward, and you know, pretty early on, I think around the beginning-ish of last year, he sent me a PDF of Afterparties, and you know, I read it and it was just slack-jawed like the first time that I made it through, and then I was like, okay, you know, let me just put it aside and give it a few weeks, and then I'll return to it again to see like if this astonishment is like how well it holds up. And then I reread it a second time and then a third time, and I was like, wow, like this guy's like I don't know how he does it. I think that on my end, it's one of those tricky things with short story collections. As soon as you say like how one is meant to do it or how it can be done, that sort of nullifies the answer in many ways. But there's the question of balance, you know, there's a question of interiority that each of the stories that will ideally have, you know, because you want each of them to survive on their own terms. You know, you want each of them to give like individually, but simultaneously you want it to exist within the larger context or within the larger world of the book. So it's a pretty tricky balance to maintain, right? Like, how do I create a world within a world that holds up within this larger structure of the universe of the collection, you know, that you're trying to put together? And, you know, Anthony just, he just does it in this book, you know, from the first story to the last. I mean, in the very last graph of the book, I'm going to read, I usually don't like reading people's things, but it's extraordinary. I'm going to read a little bit of the last bit where the narrator says, when you think about my story, I don't need you to see everything at once. I don't need you to recall the details of those tragedies that were dropped into my world. Honestly, you don't even have to try. What is nuance in the face of all that we've remembered, right? And that is something that like I've thought about, frankly, like most days since I originally read it, right? Because I feel like when you're writing a story collection, when you're writing fiction, really, and particularly when you're writing a narrative that is for and about people of the global majority, but of the marginalized populations as far as contemporary American literary fiction or contemporary white American literary fiction, it can be tempting to feel as if though you need to like over explain, or it can be tempting to feel as if you have to get it exactly right every time because this is the thing that is in the New Yorker, or this is the thing that's in one place or another. And one of the things that is just so extraordinary to me about Anthony's work is that he gets it right every time by not relying on that impulse of exact correctness. You know, he allows his characters to have the benefit of the doubt, and he allows them to make mistakes, and he allows them to live on their own terms within the context of their own lives and the communities that they belong to. And I think that's a really difficult fucking thing to like do once, to do that once really well, but to do it story after story over the entirety of the book, it's beyond, really. So it's you know, it's really astonishing what he's been able to do.
You know, it's funny that you pointed out generational differences in one of the first drafts to it. And maybe, I don't know if Dana Spiota's here. And so Dana wrote a letter to him about it. And it used to end, it was more focused on Michael Jackson, I think, in the first draft, which I think is kind of fun.
It's incredible.
I think the last line originally was, isn't that song catchy, huh? And it just feels so, you know, cheeky and corny, and you read this like revised ending and it's so deep and powerful and moving, but also I think it still is anchored within the humor of the other stories, you know. And I don't know, it's just fascinating that you landed on those words, because I think it took him a long time to find those words. I remember he was frustrated with Dana's letter on that one originally. He didn't believe her, and then he sat back and he read it again and he goes, oh wait, Dana's right. Dana's always right. So I just, you know, just a shout out to Dana Spiota if she's here. No, I don't know if she is. But, you know, I kind of, you know, this is maybe an off the cuff question because I'm very curious, and I would love to hear from all three panelists. What is, if you could pick one, and I know it's difficult, what is your favorite story and why? Or what is one story that you're just like, you go back to or just sticks with you?
I'm just gonna really quickly, because I just spoke, but human development is maybe like one of my favorite stories that I've read like in my time on Earth, like fiction-wise. Like what he's able to like accomplish. Like it's I don't want to talk too much about like how he wrote about sex, but I think the through line is that like he just did an extraordinary job of it. But the way in which he weaves together the entirety of a narrator's personhood and the way in which he sticks the landing of the ending of that story by just allowing him to breathe and just allowing him to be, right? Like the last few lines, it was like, here I was living in a district that echoed a dead San Francisco, gay, Cambodian, and not even 26, carrying in my body the aftermath of war, genocide, colonialism. And yet my task was to teach kids a decade younger, existing across an oceanic difference, what it meant to be human. How absurd, I admitted. How fucking hilarious. I was actually excited, right? And like in reading that, like I felt and like feel all of those emotions, right? Like that is so difficult to accomplish on like a line level just on the page, but it's like to impart that feeling is really difficult, right? So that's one of the many stories that will stay with me for some time.
You know, one of my a friend of mine yesterday, we were chatting, and he lives in San Francisco, works in tech, and he goes, Alex, human development killed me. And so just to say that, I think that's, especially for queer men, I think it's, I don't know if
Yeah.
I don't know if any of I don't know if any of our queer friends are in the audience tonight, but he said, I wrote that for all of our queer friends in tech because I can't stand them, but I love them anyway. So it was, I think it is really a love letter to a lot of people. So thanks for that answer, Brian. It means a lot.
I know it's an easy love affair with Super King's Sun scores again, but I have that love affair with that story. Also because that's what we were talking about before with the humor, which is amazing, but also because of the we, right? And the way that that voice kind of carries through. And because we spent so much time, honestly, I spent so much time talking with Anthony about what it means to talk about a we when no one else has ever looked for the us, right? What does it mean to bring that to a page? What does it mean to kind of throw that into a story? And also, I just feel like this story is I laughed out loud several times in this story. And it's also that laughter that like sometimes would border on like crazy energy. So that's gotta be my pick for this one.
You know, and it's funny. I mean, I wish Mark Krotov was here just to talk about Super King Sun scores again. N+1 published it. It was probably this first major, story. I think it was the first story from this collection published. Yeah. And he's, I don't know, it's like this story for Anthony was like, I think it took him a long time to get it right, but when he stuck the landing, it was incredible. And the favorite quote, and I don't know who this is, somebody who read this and goes, I know exactly what supermarket this is. I know exactly where this is. I can taste it. I can smell it. And I think that, we think a lot about like, I think sight and vision and hearing in books, but we don't always think about smell. And I think that's something just to point out, like the really raw, the repetition of it. I don't know, just this is again, like I love the story so much. So I'm really glad that, you enjoyed it too.
I'm having a hard time with this question because I love all of the stories for all of the ways that they have to be, how they need to be. They're all just so unique. But for me, I think I'll talk about The Shop. I really love that story. And I think that I once had a conversation with Anthony where he just kind of said that he felt that Shop was like, was more, it reflected him more as a person and like his vibe as a writer. So that stayed with me since he said that. And I loved the story. I was always like, I think I love it too, because there are certain ways that Anthony, he writes the voices of like our Cambodian elders in ways that just feel so accurate, all of the inflections and like we often talked about how when we speak like Khmer people speak, like we're crash landing on our syllables. And so I felt that he captured that in like Young's character or in Dr. Heng's wife, her character like was hilarious to me. I was always just like, yeah, I do know an auntie like that. I know an auntie who thinks like, who knows how I should live my life, and so he captures like all these people in ways that are so familiar to me as a Khmer person. But there were also like, Brian spoke a little bit about like interiority of the characters, and there were just really incredible moments, I think, in this story that really showed that in a way that I resonated with. He writes, this is what got me in the story. He says, I'd lived with misunderstanding for so long, I'd stopped even viewing it as bad. It was just there, embedded in everything I loved. So that was like one of the first things I underlined when I got my advanced copy. I really love those particular moments when Anthony like reveals some kind of emotional truth in the midst of, building a world around these Cambodian people. So that's my answer, but I love all the stories.
I want to, so I love that you mentioned The Shop. One of my favorite moments in The Shop, and I'm going to read a little bit just because I think again, like, I wasn't expecting it, but I just felt so drawn into it. Dr. Hang's wife is probably my favorite character in this story, which is funny because there's some characters that are more overtly based off of me in the story. And so it's on the, if anybody's following along, on the bottom of page 87. Then Dr. Hang's wife pinched my cheek and jumped into a monologue. Stupid, listen to me. I am being serious, like I'm always being. I do not joke. I do not assume anything I say is a joking matter. I only have the best and smartest intentions for you and everyone your age. Why are boys so dense? Gay boys should be less dense than other boys. No? So how come you are not? Marry a girl because that is what you should do. I'm not saying you cannot be gay. How hard is it to be normal and gay? This is the plan. You will marry a girl from Cambodia, a nice girl, a girl from a good family, a rich family, a princess from a rich family, and her parents will pay you $50,000 at least to marry their daughter. And I think we get the picture, but that's one of my favorite moments. And the funny thing about that moment for me is that is how Anthony would talk to some of his friends. Like he would just like be like, you know, one of my favorite moments in college, 4 of Anthony's friends all had really dumb problems, and they all came to them with dumb problems. And Anthony went on a monologue to each of them about how to solve their dumb problem. And that, I don't know, this feels so like Anthony in Dr. Hangwife's body. I don't know, but just thank you for bringing up that story, Monica. It means a lot. So, you know, Monica, I also, you know, I was really curious, and this is, you know, we've never talked about this. And so sorry to put you on the spotlight. You know, I know you grew up in Pennsylvania, and I know you spent time in Cambodia. And, you know, I think there's 2 things I'm curious about. You know, there's really no Cambodia in this book. There's a Cambodia-America. There's no characters going to Cambodia. Whereas in your book, there are poems where the speaker is exploring Cambodia. And I'm wondering if you might, you know, talk about like maybe what we gain from the fact that there are no characters going on, you know, backpacking trips through Cambodia, or there are no characters kind of exploring like Cambodia in that way. I don't know. I've been really curious about that to hear from you. But another question is, and a similar related, you know, this is very much a Central Valley book. And I know you grew up in Pennsylvania, and I'm just wondering like what it felt like to encounter, you know, the Khmer Cambodian-American community that, you know, is, you know, obviously a part of you, but was so distant from you growing up as well. So I know that's 2 big questions, but I've been really curious, and I would love to hear more if you have some thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so Mira mentioned Super King's Sun Scores again, and that was also like my first time entering Anthony's writing was through that story. It's interesting because you know, yeah, we definitely had like different backgrounds. I am from like Amish country in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and Anthony grew up in Stockton, California, which I'd only really heard about. You know, you hear about all kinds of different Cambodian communities that are thriving in the US. So you hear a lot about Lowell, Massachusetts, and Long Beach, California. So once I read through this entire collection, I was really excited to understand better like Stockton, you know, or just to kind of see what landscape like shaped Anthony's imagination and what brought him up as a person and a writer. But I just remember like celebrating Khmer New Year for the first time in Stockton in like 2019. I was so excited. I'd never been to a celebration as large as that at the Wat that, you know, Stockton is Cambodian community is known for. But I remember like in between festivities, I was like, I'm gonna go to Super King grocery store. I made it a point to go there because Anthony wrote a story, you know, about Super King's son. So I was like, I need to go there. And I remember snapping a photo, texting it to him, and just saying, hey, I'm like at your grocery store, you know? So anytime that I think about like Stockton, you know, I even went to like the traditional clothing, Cambodian clothing store, where they also sold DVDs, which is reflective of like Mali, 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 that story. So I think that when I went to the Wat, and I went there once when it was like empty completely, and I just remember thinking about the character Rithi in The Monks, you know, and just how Anthony portrayed that part of our culture. And so I guess like reading through Afterparties, I was really, it was so resonant because it was so refreshing, you know, to see the Cambodian diaspora like not like represented, you know, in literature, apart from like survival literature that my generation has grown up with, the stories of our elders who survived the Khmer Rouge genocide. Like Anthony is really centering Cambodian people in America, and like, how do I say, he's also like centering the second generation as well. Those who were born in this country and are inheriting their parents' traumas, but also trying to find their own way in life, and not necessarily being successful either, but just kind of trying to navigate and trying to, you know, really build their own lives. So that was just really refreshing to me to read as a Khmer person, as a Khmer writer as well. So I feel like there's so much more I can say about that, but I regret not really talking too much about traveling to Cambodia with Anthony, because I know he had traveled there himself with his family. So yeah, I love the way that he brings our community to the forefront of his stories, and just really creates space for them. Yeah.
Thanks so much for that answer. You know, one thing, I was reading Mira's work, The Sleepwalker's Guide to Dancing. And, you know, I don't know if I'm going to get to a question here, maybe I will. I just kind of want to hear Mira talk more about this. But one of my favorite moments is it's really early. It's not a favorite, but I just love it because it reminds me of Anthony so much. And the one character goes, I've seen it in the movies, Henry meets Sally. When Harry met Sally. And just this, like, there's this constant, you know, in Anthony's work, this constant, like I think there's a lot of humor that kind of comes out of like malapropisms, the disconnect between the generations. And I don't know, I just thought if there was moments in, you know, your own writing, Mira, or in Anthony's writing, you know, just resonances you saw or anything that really struck you as sort of like that older generation and that younger generation trying to overcome not just, you know, like this, like just sort of like this, like Grand Canyon, as Anthony describes it in one of his essay, you know, so like, you know, this Grand Canyon sort of generational drift, but like, there's this thing, like, now I'm rambling a little bit, but like a lot of how that's overcome is like by like these silly pop culture references or by humor, by jokes. And I don't know if I'm getting at a question here, but it just kind of—
No, but you're pointing out something that's, I mean, I feel like you're pointing out something that is maybe to me one of the biggest joys of this book, which is that the way the dialogue is constantly surprising, right? And you said that, now I wish I had something marked in here about the specific thing you're talking about, but because the dialogue doesn't go in a straightforward trajectory, because anyone can say anything at any time, I feel like there's something really exciting about watching his dialogue unfold on the page, right? It turns a story, it goes like in one direction and it turns the story in a completely different direction in a way that feels very alive and feels rife with misunderstanding, which is kind of what I love. I love how people don't always understand what they're saying to each other, but they go hard at it anyway. There's like a relentlessness to the way that his characters will doggedly stick to their own point. And that's a really fun thing to read, right? That kind of the way everybody is in their world, arguing their point and believing so much in themselves, while kind of living all over each other. That to me, I mean, is that what you're talking about a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, that you said it better than I could have said it, because you know, it was funny when I was reading your work, I noticed the dialogue between, I forget the characters' names, was just so similar to a lot of the dialogue in Anthony's characters. And that's just something that struck me as worth talking about, but something I'd never put like sort of words to it, you know, it just kind of struck me recently.
Did he show you his comics? Did you see some of the stuff that he was working on with me with the comics, which was a lot about the dialogue?
Oh, which comic was he working on with you?
You know, so he was doing a bunch of comics alongside these stories, which was really wild. I almost expected to see them in here, but it was about that. That was the thing we talked about a lot, is what people say and what they will never say, and how you commit that to kind of panels within a comic. And that to me is kind of the thing that's threading under these stories. Brian, you know what I'm talking about? The ways in which people, there's a whole subtext to the conversation that's only coming into the story at every fourth beat, but you're decimated by it every time it shows up. I feel like that's what he was working on with the comics too. And it's really fun to see them in the stories. It's really fun to see it kind of pop to the surface in them.
You know, and that was
exactly like what you said. sorry. No, I just was going to agree with Mira. Like, I think it's exactly as you said. Like, each of the characters, like, they very much believe what they're saying, right? And somehow through like alchemy and precision of his hand, we believe them as well. And that's something that is very, like, you have to be kind of a tactician in order to do that, but also you have to have a really deep understanding of feeling, which is really rare.
Such a good point. Also, tactician is the perfect word for that.
And one thing I think is really interesting about Anthony's stories too. Somebody, I can't remember what review it was. It might have been Deborah Eisenberg's review in the New York Review of Books. I thought it was absolutely lovely. He loved her writing, so I was really excited to see her review his work. And so Debbie says something about like how Anthony's characters are like, it's almost like this book could only have been written by somebody in their 20s because he really understands the emotional beats of people in their teen years, their early 20s, like children. And one thing that, there's like a lot of queer characters in the book. I mean, you can make fun and say there's like kind of like loosely veiled versions of Anthony at every age in this book. There's Vess, there's Toby, there's Anthony. And I'm just, and I don't know if I have an exact question for this, Brian, or Mira, you could also jump in, or Monica, but like, I'm just curious about that sort of like, I think when we think about queerness or a lot of books, there's like, you're focusing on like, gay characters or queer characters at the same age. Here we kind of have queerness kind of tracked over high school, college, after college. And I don't know, I was just something, I would just love to hear you speak about it, if you had any thoughts about that. Yeah, I don't know.
It's something that I've spent, since the first time that I read it, it's something that I've been thinking through, right? Because the book is undeniably queer, right? And it's an explicit thing, right? Like on a line level, right? Within the lives of each of the characters that you mentioned. Yet, this is going to sound a little woo, but the gravity of it is queer as well, in the sense that each character in their own way is coming from a position of difference in some way or another, right? In some capacity or another, they're at or remove, right? And they're in the midst of making a sort of sense, as much as they can, of their station in life, of their particular community, their communities, and how they fit within the larger whole that they're outside of. I mean, I think that it's exactly as you said. There can be a funny thing in queer American fiction where it can exist as a sort of like monolith, right? Like a narrative can only be one thing at one specific point in time, and yet what is just really like super fucking punk rock about this book and really rebellious is that it's many different things, right? And each of the stories is many different things, right? And it really resists and really fights back against the notion of a reviewer, like an academic or even like a colleague being able to codify a particular story as being, okay, it's this kind of story, right? Like, oh, this is a coming of age story, right? Oh, this is a refugee narrative, right? Or, oh, this is a community narrative, right? I mean, I think that something that I just so admire about the choices that Anthony made in this book is that he said essentially yes and, like, to each of those things, right? And in doing that, he really shows in this book that the only limits that you can set on a narrative when you're writing about your community, when you're writing about the communities around your community, are the ones that you impose upon yourselves. He really, I think, pushed at the bounds of like what is possible for queer contemporary fiction in refusing in each of these stories, and actively refusing in each of these stories to have it identify as being one particular thing, right? It's all of these things, and yet it is also undeniably queer at the end of the day. I don't know if that answered your question. It's something that I've been circling around since
I love hearing you talk about it in this way. It was so beautiful, and I think exactly right. I love that you call this book like punk rock. I think is exactly the word. It's incredible. There's one moment I wanted to point out. And maybe I'm like I'm not throwing anybody under the bus. So when Anthony passed, Molly, Molly, Molly was accepted by the Parish Review. And there was a couple moments in it that really stuck me this time. And one of them is when Anthony writes about Vesta like having like the gay sob story. And he literally is making fun of like these sort of coming out narratives. And it's kind of like, it's kind of mean in a little way, but it's also just so funny. And one thing that's really, I love about the last paragraph is some of the editors at the Parish Review, maybe I'm not supposed to say this, whoops, had suggested changing the ending. And I told Anthony's agent, no, I love the ending. And it ends, and finally I start packing, right? And so you've got Vess packing to go to college. And then the next chapter, or the next story, the shop, dealing with customers I usually call dad. So then you've got this other queer character kind of like stuck at home, who's, has been working so hard and kind of can't get out of his, sort of like upbringing in a way, but then he's also like having like this queer love affair that just like can't work out. So I think there's also really fascinating resonances where the queerness kind of jumps from characters in really unusual and unexpected ways. So I don't know, that's just a little thing I wanted to point out, a cute little quirk in the book. Yeah.
It's really, I don't know, it's just really astounding and really just rare, I think, to read a text that is so certain of what it wants to do and so certain of its own terms, and simultaneously within that certainty open to ambiguity, right? And open to fluidity and open to like the myriad of possibilities that a person can like hold at any given point in time. It feels and is like just like a deeply human text, like when a line that like I just like me and my boyfriend like we just laugh about it, like it was read a little bit earlier, but just like how hard is it to be normal and gay, like that's hilarious, like that's a really funny line, and yet there's a deep sadness to it as well, on multiple contexts, right? And then the ability to balance each of those realities simultaneously, right, is very, it's just really special.
It's also because it's not presenting queerness as a solvable problem or a knowable part of yourself, like a completely knowable part of yourself, right? I feel like so much of the early writing, in kind of fiction around queerness had to present as a this is the story so you can understand me. And I don't feel like that's what this is asking of us. I don't even feel like it's letting us do that. And there's something really alive about that feels true about that, right? Like I feel like, Brian, when you're talking about this, it feels inherently true in a way that's really refreshing.
And one thing I think with his a lot of people have come to me and have said, Anthony wrote great woman characters. It's like, how did he understand women so well? And there's so many moments too where I think like I think Anthony really thought in some ways that like women and queer men just had this sort of kinship by just the virtue of not being straight men. And there's a similar moment in Molly, Molly, Molly where they have different sort of confines and challenges where, Vess is looking at Molly and imagining like her 3 lives projected and like how different paths she could take, but they all kind of follow the same thing. It's sort of like, even for, I think, the women characters, the heterosexual characters, there's this sense of like, there's a sense of randomness and chance. There's a sense of, fortune. It's not, and there's a sense that like your path is, even if you are following the more conventional path, you're not stuck in one identity. You're just, there's different ones that you can fall between. And I think there's a similar beauty there that's also kind of not like, I don't think Molly's trapped. I think she's in some ways one of the most deeply fulfilled characters. I don't know. These are just some other thoughts. And I'm kind of curious, because, Mira, Monica, you're both women. Was there any women characters that really just struck you as like, oh my God, does Anthony just like understand what's going on? Or like just any moments? I don't know. Like I've had a lot of female friends have just said, I just really thought that Anthony was kind of a girl in this moment. Like, I don't know. It's been kind of funny, like the gender.
It's such a funny question. I mean, you point out Molly, which is one of my favorites in this, but it is this really, I have to say, I don't know that I also like Dr. Hing's wife, who was amazing, who was also one of my favorite characters, who I didn't particularly relate to, but was so sharply drawn. And the weird, like the weird forked femininity that comes out of her. I feel like those things, those are moments in the story that I felt like really grabbed me. Monica, I'm curious about you. Were there other things that you?
Yeah, I mean, as I'm listening to you all talk, there are just so many moments and like Molly, 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 the shop, but then also, of course, like Three Women of Chuck's Donuts. Like when I first read that, I told Anthony, I was like, I think I'm like Tevi, you know, I think I'm that character. And then I said, no, 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 but maybe I'm like the mom, like Sophie, you know. But then he just goes, no, you're like, you know, you're probably starving for like Khmer representation. So you, every time you see a Khmer woman, you think that's like reflecting you. But so he's like, I do the same thing. But then he just said, but you're like, you're multitudinous, you know, you're every Khmer woman. And I just loved that he gave me permission to see myself in that way. And so every single Khmer woman that appears in the story, I'm just like, wow, there's so many parts that I identify with, like Saray, the nurse, and I think like I remember that conversation, and it really like makes me kind of emotional to think about. But there's this moment in Three Women of Chuck's Donuts where like the mom is starting to think that this stranger, this man who comes in to order apple fritters every single night, she starts to think that it's like an uncle who like her ex-husband you know, just didn't give, you know, he didn't like pay back all the money, or, and like she's just like, oh, this guy is coming for us now, right? And she's just kind of like, you selfish pig of a man, you better be paying your uncle back, you better not put your daughters in danger. Like she just kind of like goes at her ex-husband, just hangs up the phone. And I just think like in that moment too, being able to see like this kind of like, you know, Khmer mother being protective and also like imagining her worst nightmare. I just loved that he took like, you know, her psyche to this other very dark place. That surprised me while reading the story too. But yeah, there is also I know I'm like talking a lot, but there's a part in the shop where like, you know, Alex, you mentioned like the queer love affair that Toby has while he's kind of like stuck in his hometown. And there's a moment where like that person he's having an affair with, Paul, he comes to the shop and the dad is there too. And the only reason why like the dad remembers that guy is because he remembered that he liked to eat durian. And there's like this whole dialogue on like page 100 that I just adored because like he's kind of like berating his kid for saying, he's just kind of like, you guys are so not Cambodian, you're not even Cambodian-American. Durian is real true Khmer food. And like he's saying that like his kids don't like durian, but like this white guy, Paul, or not this white guy, this Mexican Italian guy likes durian. And so then like there's a moment where he says, anything you eat, you should be eating. You think every meal we had during Khmer Rouge was smelling right? And there's that like inflection in his voice again that I just thought Anthony was so masterful at. And then the next part of that dialogue, Toby says, "Ba, you got to stop using the genocide to win arguments." And I just thought like that dialogue, that triangulated like Toby, Paul, and then the father, like was a masterclass for me. Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much for pointing that out. So I know it's, you know, it's 5 o'clock. It's been so incredible, you know, Brian, Mira, Monica, to hear you talk about Anthony's work. And it sounds like you three have spent some real time living in his pages. And I don't know, it was, I learned a lot from our conversation. I hope everyone, you know, listening, watching, learned a lot too. And this was a really incredible conversation. And I'm so thankful that you three could be here to honor Anthony's book. You know.
I'm muted. Apologies to everybody. I'll repeat myself. Thank you again to our audience for coming out tonight. We'll go off the the call after a little bit, but thank you for coming all the way through. I had such an absolutely wonderful and lovely time learning all about Anthony, learning about his book, and learning about his friends and family. I hope all of you that were watching also did. Remember, you can order the book, not only from Book Passage, but from any independent bookstore. I saw a number of people saying that they went out to their local indie to buy it, and then we have no ill will towards the other stores. There's no knife fights in the streets or something like that over the stuff. We all love each other. So please go and support all of them, even if we don't happen to be your indie store.
Dog-eared books on Valencia Street was sold out this week, so it was really exciting.
Wow, that's wild. Yeah, there's all sorts of really excellent stores even just in San Francisco. We're honestly I'm just so lucky to be part of not only an excellent connection of bookstores, but an excellent connection of writers and speakers that come through and talk to all of us every day. So it's very wonderful to be here. Thank you one last time for coming out tonight. I do truthfully hope to see you all in the next one.